My name is Leland, and I never imagined my life would take this turn. I'm now standing amid the ruins of what I once believed was a solid, unbreakable marriage. If someone had told me a year back that I'd be spending my nights in the guest bedroom, feeling like a visitor in my own house, I would have brushed it off with a laugh. But here I am, struggling to recognize the woman I vowed to spend my life with. Everything began unraveling with a single sentence, sharp, cold, and completely unexpected. You're nothing more than a co-parent, not my real match. Marjorie, my wife, had said it so casually, like she was talking about the weather or making an offhand remark. But to me, it felt like my entire chest had been crushed by a sledgehammer. I stood motionless, my brain grasping for meaning. Not her real match? After 11 years of marriage? We had shared everything, built a home, celebrated birthdays and holidays, endured sleepless nights with our babies, laughed at private jokes, cherished quiet Sunday mornings. And now, she was boiling it all down to a cold partnership between two people raising children under one roof. Nothing more. I wanted to respond, to ask what she truly meant by those words, but my voice was trapped in my throat. My stomach twisted with unease. Meanwhile, Marjorie remained composed, disturbingly so. She wasn't angry, didn't look for a confrontation, she simply appeared indifferent. That indifference, more than anything else, sent a chill down my spine. Her words echoed endlessly in my head that night. I questioned everything. Had she always felt this way? Had I missed the signs all along? My first instinct was to salvage what we had, to communicate, to figure out how we got here. But deep down, something held me back, a quiet but persistent whisper telling me to stop. For over a decade, I had poured myself into making Marjorie happy. I worked late hours so she could enjoy the lifestyle she desired. I booked trips, planned romantic evenings, and took on extra tasks when life overwhelmed her. I genuinely thought that was what made a good husband. But in all those efforts, maybe I had let go of who I was. Maybe I had become invisible to myself. That night, a subtle shift took place in me. If she saw me as merely a co-parent, then that's exactly the role I would fulfill. No more heart-to-hearts late at night. No more reaching for her hand during a movie. No more trying to mend things alone. I wouldn't plead or protest. I was done. At first, Marjorie didn't seem to notice the difference. If anything, she looked a little relieved. I moved through the house like a courteous tenant, polite, distant, emotionally absent. I poured my energy into the kids and filled my schedule with work, gym sessions, anything that would keep me from spiraling inward. But it didn't take long before a small crack started to form in her facade. The morning after she delivered that devastating line, I woke up feeling drained. Not angry, not heartbroken, just vacant. I had always been the one to break the silence after a disagreement, to organize thoughtful evenings, to make the effort and keep our connection alive. But now, I felt none of that. I got dressed, walked into the kitchen, and passed her by without speaking. On any other day, I might have greeted her, asked how she slept, maybe even kissed her cheek before heading out. But not this time. I quietly poured myself a cup of coffee, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door without looking back. There was no hesitation, no lingering guilt. She didn't seem fazed by my distance. She didn't ask why I was being cold or make any effort to bridge the growing space between us. Maybe she thought I was sulking, and that I'd eventually return to my old habits, apologizing, smoothing things over. But I wasn't sulking. Something in me was changing. At work, I was more productive than I'd been in years. My thoughts no longer circled around ways to make her happy. I stopped checking my phone for messages from her. And then I realized something that shook me to the core. I didn't miss her. That evening, I returned to find her lounging on the couch, staring at her phone. Usually, she would make a half-hearted attempt to ask about my day, while distracted by something else. This time, she didn't say a word. That was fine by me. I wasn't about to force conversation. I spent time with the kids, helped them with homework, made dinner. She joined us at the table, but I focused solely on our children. I laughed with them, listened intently to what they had to say, encouraged their stories. I didn't even glance in her direction. And for a brief moment, I noticed a flicker of confusion cross her face. It was subtle, but it was there. Later, I went to bed early and alone. The following days drifted into weeks. I gradually faded into a shadow of the partner I once was. Not bitter, not cold, just disengaged. I no longer initiated conversations about our relationship. I stopped inviting her to share a favorite show or reminding her of our anniversaries or shared memories. I stayed fully present for the kids. I focused on excelling at work. I picked up new hobbies I had once abandoned in my pursuit to keep our marriage intact. Marjorie began to notice the change. I saw it in the way her eyes followed me a little longer than before. The way her mouth would open, as if to speak, then close again, silenced by uncertainty. She always used to head out the door for her usual girls' nights without a second thought. But lately, there was a pause, a moment of hesitation that hadn't been there before. Still, the real turning point came about 3 months after she had coldly defined me as just the other parent. That evening, she strolled into the kitchen and leaned casually against the counter, silently observing me as I prepared lunches for the kids. After a pause, she finally broke the silence, saying, "You've been acting different lately." I didn't acknowledge her with eye contact, nor did I interrupt what I was doing. "Have I?" My voice was flat, void of curiosity. She didn't respond, but I could feel her watching me, hoping I would say more, perhaps ask how she was, offer comfort, or try to mend whatever had cracked between us. I didn't give in, and for the very first time in our relationship, she appeared unsure, off balance. It showed in the subtle way she kept shifting her weight, like someone searching for footing. She was expecting the version of me who would do anything to make things right. That man was no longer around. For the first time, I could sense genuine fear in her. Everything started to unravel fully just 2 weeks later. It was a typical Friday night, and Marjorie had made plans, as usual. Back then, I would casually ask where she was headed and who she'd be with, not because of suspicion, but out of care. But this time, I didn't ask anything at all. As I was settling the kids into bed, I heard the front door creak open. Glancing at my watch, I noticed it was not even 9 in the evening. She was home surprisingly early. When I stepped into the living room, there she was, perched stiffly on the couch, arms folded tightly, eyes locked on the floor. Her entire body radiated discomfort. Standing in the doorway, I asked, "Is something wrong?" She looked up, startled, as though she hadn't expected to be acknowledged. I just didn't feel like going out tonight," she finally said, releasing a sigh. I gave a simple nod. "Okay," I replied, then turned and walked away. For the first time, she was left behind, alone with her thoughts. At the time, I didn't dwell on it. A canceled outing didn't seem all that significant. Maybe she was just worn out or not in the mood to deal with her social circle that night. But then it happened again. The following weekend, she went through all the usual motions, getting dressed, doing her hair, picking out the right outfit. Yet instead of leaving, she just sat on the couch, idly scrolling through her phone. From the kitchen, I watched as she occasionally looked in my direction, as though waiting for me to ask what was wrong or why she hadn't gone. But I didn't take the bait. I stayed focused on my tasks, washing dishes, helping the kids prepare for bed, remaining emotionally absent from her world. When I returned to the living room later, her phone was down and her gaze was fixed on the blank TV screen. She wore the expression I had seen in my own reflection months earlier, the look of someone who finally realized the relationship was slipping away. The difference was, I had already come to terms with it. She hadn't. She kept trying to reach me in subtle ways over the next few weeks, lingering in the room longer than usual, making awkward attempts at casual conversation, even sitting at the dining table with me before the kids joined us, something she hadn't done in quite a while. But I wasn't engaging in her silent plea for connection. I wasn't offering her the comfort or validation she was fishing for. Eventually, one evening after the kids were asleep, the tension finally cracked. "Leland," she called softly, standing in the hallway as I closed the bedroom door. I turned to her, leaning casually against the doorframe, my tone even and indifferent. "Sure," I said. She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. Finally, she asked, "Are you mad at me?" I almost laughed. That would have made things simpler, wouldn't it? "No," I answered, shaking my head. "I just don't have anything to say." Her eyes widened in surprise. She had expected an argument, a confrontation, something that would signal I still cared. But I denied her that. "You've been so distant," she continued. "You barely speak to me." I crossed my arms and calmly replied, "What is there to talk about?" She frowned, visibly unsettled. "Leland, I didn't mean," but I cut her off. "You made it clear I was just a co-parent. So that's what I became." The words hit her hard. She opened her mouth as if to respond, then stopped. For the first time since all of this began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not irritation, not exasperation, real fear. Because she understood now, I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't pretending to be distant. I was truly gone. And now, it was her grasping for what we had. A week later, the truth began to show itself. Marjorie had started acting jittery, checking her phone constantly, jumping whenever I entered the room. She started leaving the house at odd hours, coming back looking uneasy. Then, one evening, she left her phone unattended on the coffee table and went into the kitchen. Normally, I wouldn't have even glanced at it. I wasn't someone who snooped. But something about the way she'd been acting made me pause. Right then, her phone lit up with a message from a name I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. I can't do this anymore." My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind racing to catch up. And suddenly, everything became clear. This had never been just about me pulling away. This was clearly about something she had done, and whatever it was, the situation was already unraveling. I hadn't even touched her phone. There was no need. That single message had revealed more than enough. My thoughts were a whirlwind as I sat silently, eyes fixed on the screen. "We need to talk. I can't do this anymore." I wasn't naive. This wasn't from a colleague, a friend, or a relative. This was from someone who had been romantically involved with my wife, and they were now bringing things to an end. Judging by the way Marjorie had been acting lately, jumpy, overly affectionate, suddenly craving my attention, she wasn't the one choosing to walk away. I heard her footsteps returning from the kitchen. Just as she stepped into the room, the screen dimmed, and the message vanished like it had never existed. She froze for a split second upon seeing me on the couch, my face unreadable. There was a shift in her posture, a pause in her step. She sensed something was off. But I had no intention of making it easy for her. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice feigning lightness. I glanced from her to her phone and back again before responding. "You tell me." Her expression flickered, a barely noticeable twitch. Panic. I could see it. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound innocent. I let the silence hang in the air, giving her space to stew in it. Then, with a nonchalant shrug, I said, "Nothing." She swallowed hard, clearly expecting more, but I gave her nothing else. Instead, I stood up and walked past her, heading straight to bed. I felt her gaze follow me every step of the way. The next morning, she was acting differently. She hovered near me, inventing reasons to talk, brushing my arm every chance she got. She even brewed coffee for me, a rare gesture these past several months. I played along, pretending nothing had changed. Let her think she was in control, that she was hiding it well. But now, I was curious to see just how far she would go. That night, after she had fallen asleep, I did something I never imagined I would. I unlocked her phone and went through it. What I found confirmed everything. Messages, photos, plans they had made. But the most painful part? This had been going on for over a year. While I had been working tirelessly, raising our children, trying to be the best partner I could be, she had been living a double life. She had lied to my face every single day. I sat in the darkness, scrolling through everything. My heart was calm, my hands steady. I wasn't shocked. I had already grieved the loss of our relationship. I had already let her go. Now, it was her turn to experience what it felt like to be left behind. I couldn't say how long I sat there, eyes locked on the glow of Marjorie's phone screen. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't matter anymore. I went through each message, each missed call, every little plan they had made while I was being a faithful husband and a devoted father. There was nothing romantic or thrilling in those conversations. They were dull, cheap exchanges between two people who believed they were clever. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, it was the way she spoke about me. She didn't just say she had lost interest. She described me as dull, routine, lacking excitement. He made her feel alive in ways I apparently never could. I read it all. Every cruel remark. Every excuse she made to justify her deception. And through it all, one name stood out. Adrian. That was the man she had gambled everything for. The same man who was now pulling away. I had no idea who Adrian was, perhaps a colleague, a gym acquaintance, maybe someone from her past. It didn't matter. He was finished with her. I could tell from the tone of his messages that she hadn't anticipated this. She was clinging desperately to something that was already crumbling. I put the phone back exactly where I had found it, got up, and returned to bed. I didn't wake her. I didn't speak a word. I wanted her to feel the shift, the quiet change in the air. I wanted her to sense that I knew, that I had seen it all. And I was curious how long she could keep up the act. The following morning, Marjorie overcompensated. She greeted me with an overly cautious smile and busied herself with the kids. She poured my coffee again, an act reserved for moments when guilt gnawed at her. Sitting across from me at the breakfast table, she observed me like I was some complex puzzle she couldn't solve. I moved slowly, ate my breakfast, sipped my coffee, glanced at my phone, never once making eye contact. She couldn't take the tension. "Are you all right?" she finally asked, trying to sound casual. I raised my eyes and looked directly into hers. Let the silence stretch out, then gave a small nod. Yeah, why? She hesitated. Her fingers twitched slightly around her coffee cup. She was waiting for something, maybe an accusation, a confrontation, a breakdown. But I wasn't giving her any of that. Not yet. No reason, she muttered eventually, her eyes dropping to her plate. She was rattled. It was obvious. She had no idea how much I knew or if I knew anything at all. And that uncertainty? It was slowly destroying her from the inside. For the first time in months, I was the one in control. That evening, once the kids were tucked in for the night, she made another attempt. She sat down beside me on the couch, far too close, like she was trying to manufacture intimacy. Leland, she murmured softly while reaching for my hand. You've been so distant lately. I allowed her fingertips to brush against mine before gently pulling away, not in anger, not with resentment, just enough to make it clear she no longer had a grip on me. I've been busy, I replied in a flat tone. She studied my face, searching for a sign, something that would reveal vulnerability. Anger. Sadness. Any crack in the armor. But I kept my expression unreadable. Is there something you want to talk about? She asked with caution, trying to sound gentle. I almost laughed out loud. She was hoping I'd explode, hoping for confrontation, anything to shift the blame or turn the focus. But I wasn't going to play her game. Not really, I said as I stood up. I'm heading to bed. Her face dropped. For the first time in our relationship, she was the one left behind, chasing after me. 2 days later, everything unraveled. I was working in my office at home when she stormed in. Her eyes were bloodshot, breath ragged. Leland, she stammered, her voice unsteady, I need to tell you something. I leaned back in my chair, raising an eyebrow. Okay. She hesitated, clearly struggling to decide how to frame it. I could see her thoughts racing, searching for a way to spin the truth. Then, finally, she gave up the performance. I made a mistake. That's what she called it, a mistake. An entire year spent in a relationship with someone else, lying to my face, tearing me down emotionally, treating me like I was invisible. A mistake. I didn't respond. I just watched her. I didn't mean for it to happen, she went on, her voice shaking. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was being stupid, Leland. I raised my hand to stop her. Who is he? She recoiled like she hadn't expected that question. As though I didn't already know. Does it matter? She whispered. I let out a breath and shook my head. Not anymore. Because she was right, it didn't matter. She had already lost me. Marjorie stayed rooted to the spot, waiting for me to react. To say something she could cling to spark a discussion, or even an argument. Something she could reshape into a we problem. But she no longer had that right. I no longer cared who Adrian was. That part of me had withered long ago. She'd spent an entire year betraying our vows, convincing herself I was just a placeholder. The dependable one who watched the kids and held the house together while she disappeared into someone else's life. And now? Now that her plan B had evaporated, she was suddenly desperate for my attention. I leaned back, studying her. She was coming apart, fingers twitching, chest rising and falling rapidly, constantly swallowing as though her throat was dry. She wasn't afraid of me or what I might do. She was scared because, for the first time in our marriage, she had no idea what I was thinking. And I let her sit in that uncertainty. You're right, I said at last, calm and composed. It doesn't matter. Those words struck her like a physical blow. Her breath caught, and for a split second, I saw raw panic flash across her eyes. She'd expected rage. She'd braced for shouting. Instead, I offered nothing. Leland, she started, but I walked past her without a second glance. As if she didn't exist. As if she no longer mattered. Because, truthfully, she didn't. Later that night, she hovered by the bedroom door. I could hear her hesitate, then finally push it open and step inside. I was already in bed, facing the wall. For months now, she'd avoided sleeping here, preferring the couch or simply staying out late. But now, all of a sudden, she wanted back in. She took a deep breath before speaking. Can we talk? No. Silence. Then softly, please. I let out a sigh and sat up. Marjorie, what do you want? She twisted her hands together, her posture small and collapsed, like she was folding in on herself. I don't want this to end. A humorless laugh escaped my lips. Now she didn't want things to fall apart? After a year of betrayal and lies? After humiliating me day after day? I stared at her for a long time, letting the silence linger, letting her stew in the discomfort. Then I asked, did you love him? She winced, as if the words had struck her. I I don't know. Wrong answer. I nodded, pushed the covers aside, and climbed out of bed. Where are you going? She asked, her voice trembling with panic. To sleep somewhere else. I didn't need to hear anything more. She hadn't said no. She didn't even bother to lie. She didn't try to convince me she only wanted me. Because she couldn't. And that told me everything I needed to know. By the next morning, she barely said a word. She stood silently, watching me as I packed a small bag. I wasn't leaving for good, just stepping away for a while. I had no interest in fighting or giving her a dramatic exit. I was finished. She followed me to the front door, her voice breaking. Leland, don't do this. I turned to look at her, tilting my head slightly. Do what? I asked. Just walk away like this? She looked at me like there was still something worth holding on to, like we could patch things up. I gripped the strap of my bag tightly and released a deep breath. No, Marjorie. This is beyond fixing. You're the one who broke it. Then I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and for the first time in over a year, I felt a weight lift. I didn't glance back. As I walked down the driveway, I could sense her still standing behind the closed door. Her breaths were shallow. She hesitated, probably debating whether to chase after me or let me go. But she didn't move. And that was fine. Let her stay there. Let her feel what it's like to be left, to sit with that silence. I had no plan. I wasn't sure where I was heading. What I knew for sure was that I needed distance. Distance from her. From the house we had poured our lives into. From the version of myself that had been stretched thin trying to keep everything from falling apart. So, I got in my car and drove. I didn't aim for a friend's place. I didn't search for a hotel. I simply drove, letting every mile put more space between me and the life I no longer wanted to carry. Somewhere along the way, that heavy feeling in my chest started to lift, just a bit. A few hours later, I found myself checking into a modest motel on the edge of town. It wasn't anything special, just a quiet place where I could think, sit in the stillness, and figure out my next move. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to see her name on the screen. I wasn't ready to read those "we need to talk" messages or any of her pleas. I knew they'd come, and I didn't want any part of them. Instead, I lay down on the stiff mattress, staring up at the ceiling, letting the silence wrap around me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel crushed by anger or sorrow. I just felt finished. When the sun rose the next morning, I turned my phone back on. As expected, there were dozens of messages from Marjorie. Some sounded remorseful, others defensive. A few were downright desperate. Please come home, she wrote. We can fix this. The kids need you. Don't throw everything away over one mistake. But I stayed silent. Because this wasn't about one mistake. This was about hundreds of choices she made, day after day. Countless times she could have stopped. Could have thought about what she was doing. Chosen honesty, loyalty, basic decency. But she didn't. Every time, she picked him. That wasn't a slip-up. That was intentional. Now she had to face that. I didn't return home right away. I took a few more days just for myself, thinking, reflecting, deciding what came next. Eventually, I made a phone call. Not out of spite. Not as a way to punish her. But because it was clear there was nothing left worth saving. Once the paperwork was ready, I walked back into the house, not as her husband, not as someone searching for answers, but as someone ready to move on. Marjorie was there waiting. Her face looked pale, eyes swollen from crying. She looked exhausted, like sleep hadn't visited her in days. That was fine. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. I placed the divorce papers on the kitchen counter and slid them her way. Sign them, I said. Her hands trembled as she picked up the stack of pages, flipping through them as if hoping the words might change. Leland, she finally said, voice cracking, are you really willing to give all of this up? I looked her straight in the eye, my voice calm. You gave it up first. That silence that followed hit hard. She wasn't ready for that. She hadn't expected this level of composure from me, this level of finality. That was when it hit her. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a scare tactic. This was the end. She had truly lost me. She didn't sign the documents right away. I didn't think she would. Marjorie had always clung to control, always needed to feel like she was one step ahead. But she lost that grip the moment I stopped trying to fight for us. She sat staring at the papers, her fingers clutching the pages as if they were her last anchor to what we once had. Leland, she whispered, barely holding it together, I don't want this. I gave a simple nod, my face unreadable. I know. She blinked slowly, like she had braced herself for an argument, like she thought I might try to talk her out of it. But I didn't. There was no fight left in me. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't heartbroken. I had found peace. A few days later, she finally signed. It didn't come easy. She made late-night calls. Tried guilt. Tried tears. But I didn't waver. I stood firm, knowing that this was the right choice for me, and for the future I was beginning to shape. And once everything was finalized, I packed my things, left the house, and began again. The early months were strange, adjusting to life without the marriage that had defined me for so long. I had spent years trying to be the perfect partner, the father I believed my children needed. Somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. But for the first time in years, I turned my attention inward. I picked up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and took trips I had always postponed. Little by little, I began to rediscover the person I had forgotten I could be. A stronger, more whole version of myself. 1 year later, I saw Marjorie again at a school function for our children. She looked changed. Older. Weary. Her smile was forced when our eyes met. But behind it, I saw something else. Regret. She understood deep down, recognized the truth that she had let go of something genuine, something irreplaceable. We exchanged small talk for a short while, keeping the conversation light and distant. There were no meaningful confessions, no emotional exchanges, just two individuals who had once shared a world but now stood on separate paths. As I turned to leave, there was no wave of bitterness or sorrow, not a flicker of pain. What I felt instead was pure, unshakable relief. For the first time in many years, I experienced a sense of wholeness, a deep and lasting happiness. And that was the one thing she would never have the power to take from me again.